The most widely predicted armed conflict in the world today is Israel versus Iran. The New York Times is amongst many who've hyped the prospect of war. But it's a fact that both sides have been attacking each other's citizens for years. In Agenda this week, we examine these attacks and ask also, why does Hezbollah, Iran's ally, appear not to be involved? I'm Colin Chapman, and joining me to discuss this are Stratfor's tactical and terrorism analysts Scott Stewart and Fred Burton. Scott, if I can start with you, can you refresh us with a little of the history of attacks between these two sides?
Well, really, Colin, it goes back about 5 years. Fred and I have been analyzing what we call the Covert War between Israel and the U.S. and Iran since about 2007. One of the big main events was at the end of 2006. We had the defection of a major Iranian general who had run their nuclear program, a guy by the name of Ashgari. And that got us to the point of talking about how the Israelis and the Americans were trying to use things like defections in order to try to throw off the Iranian nuclear program.
And what have the Iranians been doing?
Well, obviously, they've been responding.
Well, I think so. I also think that when you're looking at Iran, as you and I both know, Scott, from our history in dealing with their scope of global and terrorism kind of issues, that they are not afraid of using assassination as a tool of foreign policy if it fits their ultimate strategic goals.
Yeah, that's true. I think one of the things that's really surprised us, though, Colin, as Fred and I have talked about this, really since about 2007, we've been talking about the Iranians using one of their ace in the hole, if you will, and that's the Hezbollah card as part of their clandestine war. But for some reason, that's something that we really haven't seen happen. Instead, we've seen the Iranians doing these things themselves, and really they've been pretty poorly done.
There was an example only this week in Bangkok when an Iranian terrorist blew his own legs off.
Well, absolutely. We've actually had 3 failed attacks this week. We had one in Tbilisi, Georgia, where they attempted to place a device underneath a car that was discovered before it could be activated. We had another failed attack in New Delhi, India, where we believe it was Iranians, tried to kill the wife of an Israeli diplomat as she was going to pick up her children from school. And then, of course, we did have that Bangkok incident where we had the Iranians had an explosion in their residence. We believe they're probably working on an IED, improvised explosive device. They had an explosion. One of the Iranians was wounded. When he tried to hop a taxi cab, the cab drivers wouldn't pick him up because he had blood running down from his face. He got mad at the cabbie then and threw a grenade at the cab. This, of course, caused everyone to focus on him. The police started chasing him. He tried to throw a grenade at the police, and that bounced back and allegedly took his legs off. And it's not really what one would normally think of when it comes to the Iranians. I mean, I think that over the years we've had this concept, that they were very adept at terrorism and at this kind of, clandestine skullduggery.
I'd like to come back to the lack of involvement of Hezbollah in a moment, but the Iranians seem to have been picking relatively soft targets, like, for example, the wife of a diplomat.
Without a doubt, Colin, I think when you look at the scope of some of the targeting that has taken place, I think you also have to include the efforts to try to kill the Tandar dissident in the Los Angeles area, which came to light after WikiLeaks, and that was also associated with an effort to perhaps target a Voice of America talking head that was an Iranian dissident. And again, bringing it back closer to home here for us in Texas, we have this unusual murder of the 30-year-old Iranian female in Houston that is very, very suspicious. And it's my understanding that the leads have pretty much dried up on that. So I think when you look at this, the question is who perhaps could be putting together these operations inside of either the IRGC or the MOIS. Also, let's not rule out that we had the recent targeting of the Saudi ambassador to the United States, which was an operation that was put together out of Mexico City.
Well, yeah, one of the interesting things, honestly, we know from the case involving the San Antonio used car dealer who was involved in this attempt to get a hitman from the Zetas to kill the Saudi ambassador. We know that he was in contact with some officials in Quds Force, which is part of the IRGC. Honestly, when we first heard the details of that case, we were very skeptical because it just seemed so amateurish and so kind of off the wall. It just kind of boggled our minds that the Iranians would be involved with something that was so juvenile.
And Colin, I think too, you have to look at this and remember, Scott and I have been involved in this for 25 years now. I can remember the Iranians pulling off very good operations, such as the Tabatabai killing, where they used David Belfield, dressed up as a U.S. postman, to deliver a letter, and the victim answered the door, who was an Iranian exile, and Belfield gunned him down in his doorway and fled to Iran. So at times over the course of history, they've been very, very effective, and yet we've seen some of these sloppy antics of late.
Let's look at the Israelis. They tend to be very surgical with their attacks.
Well, and that's what's really been a stark contrast here. You know, on the Iranian side, we see them, attempting to kill a woman as she's going to pick up her children after school. On the Israeli side, we've seen them successfully hit Iranian nuclear scientists in Tehran. We've seen them blow up missile bases and kill generals who ran the Iranian missile program. So it's really a stark difference in the target set and the professionalism. And it showed that the Israelis really have an ability to operate in a hostile environment much better than the Iranians.
I think, too, Colin, when you look at this, and I don't know what Scott thinks on this point, is remember the Israeli intelligence service is very, very small. They simply don't have the resources that the U.S., the British, the Australian services have in general. But they're laser focused on Iran and Iran's nuclear development. And it's been my experience over the years in looking at Israeli operations, when they laser focus or fixate on one specific target because of their national security, that they're very effective in getting the job done.
Or maybe we've seen a shift. Maybe we've seen a shift going from the MOIS, and perhaps, in the old days it was the MOIS did a lot of the dirty jobs overseas, and now we've seen indications that we've got Quds Force. So perhaps this is just an indication of the level of capabilities between the two. One other thing I'd like to add, though, to what Fred said about the Israelis going all out. When we see the Israelis not only developing, but being willing to use a totally new weapon set with something like Stuxnet, that is just showing how focused that they are on this threat, and the fact that they're willing to burn something and use it now and not wait for a later time is showing that they really do take the Iranian nuclear threat very seriously.
I said we'd come back to Hezbollah. Briefly, Scott, why do you think Hezbollah has not been active on the Iranian side? It's a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think when we're talking about Hezbollah that I think needs to be made clear, we see a lot of speculation in the media right now that's tying these recent attempts and attacks to the assassination of Imad Mughniyah in Damascus just a little over 4 years ago. But really, these incidents were not done by Hezbollah. And they fit in with these other series of events that we've been seeing over the past year and the past months. Indeed, we had 3 disrupted plots just in January that would have had no relation whatsoever to the Mughniyah assassination. So I think that it's pretty easy for us to say that this was not related to Mughniyah because, number one, it's the Iranians. Number two, it's just part of a longer train of things. So the speculation is just kind of ill-founded. One thing that we think, Colin, when we look at Hezbollah, and one of the things that has been tough for people like Fred and I, because of our background going back into the 80s looking at them is the fact that Hezbollah has changed over these decades. I mean, at first when they came up, they were basically a bunch of poor kids from these slummy areas. They didn't really have a lot to lose, and now it's become a very powerful organization. It's a political party, and a lot of the higher officials within Hezbollah are actually very powerful people who make a lot of money, who own a lot of property, and they have an address now. So there's really, these people who were these radical young punks in the 80s are now very rich, very powerful men who have an address and can be tracked down.
We'll have to leave it there for now. Scott Stewart and Fred Burton, thank you for joining me on Agenda. I'm Colin Chapman. See you next time. Goodbye.